At the county jail, Thomas watched as the two imposters were booked and processed. Their fake badges and IDs had been confiscated, and they were now facing felony charges for burglary and attempted fraud. As Thomas filled out the last of the paperwork, the taller man, whose name was apparently Frank, approached the bars of his cell. "Come on, Sheriff, you've got to let us out of here," he pleaded. "This is all just a big misunderstanding. We really are from the HOA, and we were just doing our jobs." Thomas fixed him with a steely gaze. "I've seen a lot of crooked schemes in my time, but impersonating HOA officials to prey on vulnerable homeowners, that's a new low, even for scumbags like you." "It's the truth, I swear," Frank insisted. "We were just trying to make sure everyone was following the rules. You've got to believe us." "The only thing I believe is that you're both going away for a long time," Thomas replied. "No more sob stories. You made your bed, now lie in it." He turned to leave, but Frank's voice stopped him. "Wait. At least tell us who ratted us out. Was it one of the other homeowners?" Thomas paused, a wry smile crossing his face. "Nope. You got busted by the county sheriff. Apparently, you picked the wrong guy's house to target." The realization slowly dawned on Frank's face, his expression shifting from desperation to pure dread. Thomas watched the color drain from the man's cheeks as the gravity of his mistake sank in. "No, it can't be," Frank stammered. "You're the sheriff?" Thomas nodded. "That's right. And in this county, we don't take kindly to con artists preying on our citizens. You two are going away for a long, long time." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving the imposters to stew in their failure. As he headed back to his patrol car, Thomas couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. These crooks had learned a valuable lesson. You don't mess with the county sheriff. But even as he pulled out of the jail's parking lot, Thomas couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this was just the beginning. If these two were willing to impersonate HOA officials, who knows what other scams they might have been running. He needed to find out more, and fast. The safety of his community depended on it. At the county jail, Thomas watched as the two imposters were booked and processed. Their fake badges and IDs had been confiscated, and they were now facing felony charges for burglary and attempted fraud. As Thomas filled out the last of the paperwork, the taller man, whose name was apparently Frank, approached the bars of his cell. "Come on, Sheriff, you've got to let us out of here," he pleaded. "This is all just a big misunderstanding. We really are from the HOA, and we were just doing our jobs." Thomas fixed him with a steely gaze. "I've seen a lot of crooked schemes in my time, but impersonating HOA officials to prey on vulnerable homeowners, that's a new low, even for scumbags like you." "It's the truth, I swear," Frank insisted. "We were just trying to make sure everyone was following the rules. You've got to believe us." "The only thing I believe is that you're both going away for a long time," Thomas replied. "No more sob stories. You made your bed, now lie in it." He turned to leave, but Frank's voice stopped him. "Wait. At least tell us who ratted us out. Was it one of the other homeowners?" Thomas paused, a wry smile crossing his face. "Nope. You got busted by the county sheriff. Apparently, you picked the wrong guy's house to target." The realization slowly dawned on Frank's face, his expression shifting from desperation to pure dread. Thomas watched the color drain from the man's cheeks as the gravity of his mistake sank in. "No, it can't be," Frank stammered. "You're the sheriff?" Thomas nodded. "That's right. And in this county, we don't take kindly to con artists preying on our citizens. You two are going away for a long, long time." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving the imposters to stew in their failure. As he headed back to his patrol car, Thomas couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. These crooks had learned a valuable lesson. You don't mess with the county sheriff. But even as he pulled out of the jail's parking lot, Thomas couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this was just the beginning. If these two were willing to impersonate HOA officials, who knows what other scams they might have been running. He needed to find out more, and fast. The safety of his community depended on it. After booking the two imposters, Sheriff Thomas Olson headed back to the station to dig deeper into their case. Something about their brazen attempt to con a homeowner, especially one who happened to be the county sheriff, didn't sit right with him. Pulling up the men's arrest records, Thomas began piecing together their criminal history. Frank Delgado and his partner, Mitch Granger, had a long rap sheet stretching back over a decade. Burglary, fraud, grand theft auto. You name it, they'd likely done it. These two jokers have been running scams all over the state, Thomas muttered to himself, shaking his head in disgust. Looks like they finally picked the wrong target. He continued sifting through the files, searching for any clues that might shed light on their latest scheme. As he scanned the reports, one detail in particular caught his eye. Both men had recently been paroled from a state prison upstate. Thomas felt a growing sense of unease. If these crooks were already back to their old tricks, it was only a matter of time before they struck again. And this time, their next victims might not be as lucky as he was. Determined to stop them before they could do any more harm, Thomas picked up the phone and placed a call to the parole officer listed in the file. "This is Sheriff Olson. I've got a couple of your parolees sitting in my jail, and I think they've been running a pretty nasty con game out here in my county." The parole officer, a gruff-sounding man named Hank, listened intently as Thomas laid out the details. "Damn, I should have known those two would be up to no good," Hank growled. "They've been on my radar ever since they got sprung. Always looking for the next easy score. Well, they just tried to pull one on me, and that's a mistake they're going to regret," Thomas said. "I want to know everything you can tell me about their operation. We need to shut them down for good before they hurt someone else." Hank paused, then let out a heavy sigh. "All right, Sheriff, here's the deal. Those two knuckleheads have been running a pretty slick scam, targeting homeowners associations all over the state. They'd show up with fake badges, claiming to be inspectors or officials, then strong-arm their way into people's homes." Thomas clenched his jaw, feeling his anger rise. "And what would they do once they got inside?" "That's the worst part," Hank replied. "They'd case the joint, looking for valuables, cash, anything they could steal. Sometimes they'd even try to intimidate the homeowners into handing stuff over." "Unbelievable," Thomas muttered. "So they were basically just burglars in disguise." "Exactly. And they were damn good at it, too. Managed to pull off a bunch of heists before someone finally caught on," Hank said. "Looks like you were the one to finally nail their asses." Thomas allowed himself a small smile. "Well, I'm glad I could do my part to take these lowlifes off the streets. But I have a feeling this isn't the end of their story." "You got that right, Sheriff," Hank replied grimly. "These two aren't the type to go down without a fight. I'd keep a close eye on them if I were you." Thomas nodded, his expression hardening. "Trust me, I plan to. No one pulls a fast one on me and gets away with it." With that, he hung up the phone, already formulating a plan to ensure Frank and Mitch wouldn't be causing any more trouble in his county. After his conversation with the parole officer, Sheriff Thomas Olson knew he had to move quickly. Frank and Mitch weren't your average petty criminals. They were seasoned con artists with a long history of evading the law. And if they managed to escape custody, there was no telling how much damage they could do. Summoning his top deputies, Thomas laid out what he had learned about the duo's previous scams. These guys have been targeting homeowners associations all over the state, using fake badges to gain access to people's homes and rob them blind. "We need to make sure they don't pull that stunt again." One of the deputies, a sharp-eyed veteran named Samantha, spoke up. "So what's the plan, Sheriff?" "You want us to keep them locked up for good?" Thomas shook his head. "No, I've got a better idea. We're going to use their own tricks against them." He explained his strategy in detail, outlining a sting operation that would lure the two imposters back into the open. It was a risky gambit, but Thomas was convinced it was the only way to put a permanent stop to their criminal enterprise. "All right, let's get moving," he said, his voice filled with determination. "The sooner we get this done, the sooner we can put these scumbags away for a long, long time." Within hours, the plan was in motion. Thomas and his deputies established a command center at a vacant house in one of the wealthier neighborhoods, carefully planting the bait that would draw Frank and Mitch back out of hiding. As night fell, the sheriff and his team hunkered down, waiting with bated breath. They knew it was only a matter of time before the con artists took the bait. Sure enough, just after midnight, a pair of shadowy figures appeared, cautiously approaching the house. Thomas signaled his deputies to hold their positions, watching intently as the men crept closer. "There they are," he whispered, his hand hovering near his holstered weapon. "Get ready." Frank and Mitch paused at the front door, carefully examining the lock. Seemingly satisfied that no one was home, they produced a set of lock picks and began working on the mechanism. Thomas clenched his jaw, every muscle in his body tense. Now. On his command, the deputies surged forward, swarming the would-be burglars. Frank and Mitch whirled around, faces etched with shock and terror as they realized they'd been caught in a trap. "County Sheriff's Department." Hands in the air. Samantha yelled, her gun trained on the men. Panicked, the two imposters tried to flee, but the deputies were too fast. Within seconds, they were tackled to the ground and handcuffed, their fake badges and lock picks confiscated. As Thomas approached the defeated crooks, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction. "Gentlemen, I believe you two have some unfinished business with the county jail. Let's go." Frank and Mitch could only stare at him, their faces ashen with the realization that their scheme had been foiled. The sheriff had outsmarted them at their own game, and they had no one to blame but themselves. Thomas watched as his deputies led the crestfallen con artists away, silently vowing to ensure they would not be troubling his community ever again. With any luck, this would be the last time these two tried to pull one over on the county sheriff. Back at the county jail, Sheriff Thomas Olson watched as Frank and Mitch were booked and processed once again. This time, the charges were even more serious: burglary, attempted breaking and entering, and impersonating law enforcement officers. As the deputies escorted the two men to their cells, Thomas couldn't help but feel a sense of grim satisfaction. These crooks had messed with the wrong sheriff, and now they were going to pay the price. But just as he was about to leave, one of the deputies approached him with a concerned look on his face. "Sheriff, there's something you should know," the deputy said quietly. "We just got a call from the parole officer. Apparently, Frank and Mitch have some pretty powerful connections on the outside." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you talking about?" "Turns out these guys have been working with a local crime syndicate," the deputy explained. "The parole officer thinks they were using the HOA scam to case homes for a larger burglary operation." Thomas cursed under his breath. He should have known there was more to this than just a couple of petty con artists. These men were part of a much larger criminal network, and they weren't going to go down without a fight. "Did the parole officer give us any leads on this syndicate?" he asked, his mind racing. The deputy nodded. "He said they've been tracking this group for months, but they've been careful to keep their hands clean. The only solid connection they have is a guy named Liam Donovan. He's the one who's been pulling the strings behind the scenes." Thomas frowned. "Liam Donovan. Huh. I know that name. Isn't he the owner of that big construction company downtown?" "The very same," the deputy confirmed. "Parole officer says he's got his fingers in all kinds of shady dealings, using his legitimate business as a front for all sorts of criminal activity." Thomas let out a frustrated sigh. Of course it had to be someone with deep pockets and political connections. This was going to be a lot more complicated than he'd anticipated. "All right, here's what we're going to do," he said, his voice low and determined. I want every available deputy out there canvassing the streets, looking for any leads on this Donovan character and his syndicate. We need to shut this whole operation down before they can do any more damage." The deputy nodded. "You got it, Sheriff. We'll put out an all-points bulletin and start digging into Donovan's background. Hopefully, we can find something to bring him down." "Good," Thomas replied. "And keep a close eye on our two friends in there. I've got a feeling they're not going to make this easy for us." As the deputy hurried off to relay the orders, Thomas turned and headed back to his office, his mind racing with the implications of what he just learned. This was no longer just about a couple of con artists. It was about taking down an entire criminal enterprise. He couldn't help but feel a sense of determination, mixed with a healthy dose of trepidation. This was going to be the biggest challenge of his career as sheriff, but he was determined to see it through. The safety of his community depended on it. Over the next few days, Sheriff Thomas Olson and his team of deputies worked tirelessly to uncover the truth behind the criminal syndicate that Frank and Mitch were a part of. Their investigation led them deep into the shadowy world of organized crime, where they encountered roadblock after roadblock. "This Liam Donovan character is slippery," Thomas muttered, flipping through the latest batch of case files. "He's got his hands in so many pies, it's going to take us forever to connect all the dots." Samantha, his trusted deputy, nodded grimly. "Yeah, and the worst part is, he's got a lot of influence in this town. Seems like every time we try to dig into his business dealings, we hit a brick wall." Thomas drummed his fingers on the desk, his brow furrowed in concentration. There's got to be a way to break through. These guys are running a major criminal enterprise, and I'll be damned if I'm gonna let them get away with it. Just then, one of the younger deputies burst into the room, his eyes alight with excitement. "Sheriff, we might have something," he exclaimed. "Remember that burglary back in March, the one at the Browning estate? Well, turns out there were some suspicious financial transactions that just got flagged in the system." Thomas sat up straight, his interest piqued. "Go on." "Looks like a large sum of money was funneled through one of Donovan's shell companies right after the break-in," the deputy explained. "We think it might be the proceeds from the heist." Thomas felt a grin spreading across his face. Well, that's exactly the kind of lead we've been looking for. Nice work, deputy." Samantha leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "So, what's the plan, Sheriff? You thinkin' we pay Donovan a little visit?" Thomas shook his head. "Not yet. First, I want to see if we can dig up some more dirt on this guy. I want to make sure we've got him dead to rights before we make our move." He stood up from his desk, a determined look on his face. "All right, let's get a warrant for those financial records. And see if you can get a surveillance team on Donovan's office and his known associates. I want to know every move he makes." The deputies nodded and hurried off to carry out their orders. Thomas watched them go, his mind racing with the implications of this latest development. If they could trace the stolen goods back to Donovan, it would be the key to unraveling the entire criminal network. But even as he felt a surge of excitement, Thomas couldn't shake the sense of unease that had been gnawing at him. This was a high-stakes game they were playing, and he knew Donovan wouldn't go down without a fight. Still, the sheriff was more determined than ever to see this through. He'd come too far to let these crooks slip through his fingers. One way or another, he was going to bring them all down. In the weeks that followed, Sheriff Thomas Olson and his team of deputies worked tirelessly to build their case against Liam Donovan and his criminal syndicate. With the help of the financial records they had obtained, they were able to uncover a complex web of money laundering, fraud, and other illicit activities. The surveillance team had also been keeping a close eye on Donovan's movements, tracking his interactions with known associates and keeping tabs on his business dealings. Slowly but surely, the pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place. But even as they closed in on their target, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. There was an uneasy tension in the air, a sense that Donovan's people were always one step ahead of them. One evening, As Thomas was poring over the latest reports, his phone suddenly rang. It was Samantha, her voice tense and urgent. "Sheriff, we've got a problem. Frank and Mitch just escaped from the county jail." Thomas felt his heart drop. "What? How the hell did that happen?" "We're not sure yet, but the guards reported a disturbance in the cell block just before they disappeared," Samantha explained. "We've got every available deputy searching the area, but so far there's no sign of them." Thomas cursed under his breath. This was exactly the kind of setback he had been dreading. With Frank and Mitch back on the loose, there was no telling what kind of chaos they might unleash. "All right, put out an all-points bulletin," he ordered, "and get some extra patrols on the streets, especially around known associates of Donovan. Those two scumbags are probably long gone, but they might try to regroup with their boss." "Got it, Sheriff," Samantha replied. "We're doing everything we can to track them down." Thomas hung up the phone, his mind racing. This was just the kind of complication he could have done without. He had been so close to finally bringing Donovan down, and now he was faced with the prospect of having to deal with those two escaped convicts all over again. Just then, another call came in. This time, it was from one of the deputies working the surveillance detail on Donovan's office. "Sheriff, we've got a situation," the deputy reported. "Donovan just left his office in a hurry, and it looks like he's headed to a warehouse on the outskirts of town." Thomas felt a surge of adrenaline. "All right, get a team together and follow him. I'm on my way." He grabbed his keys and rushed out of the station, determined to finally bring this whole sordid affair to an end. If Donovan was on the move, it could mean he was making a desperate play to cover his tracks or flee the area. Either way, Thomas wasn't about to let him slip through his fingers. Not after all the hard work his team had put in. As he sped through the streets, sirens blaring, the sheriff steeled himself for what was to come. This was it, the final showdown between the forces of law and order, and the shadowy criminal empire that had been terrorizing his community. One way or another, it was all going to come crashing down tonight. Sheriff Thomas Olson arrived at the warehouse just as his deputies were surrounding the building, their weapons drawn and ready. He could feel the tension in the air, the anticipation of the impending confrontation. "All right, everybody stay sharp," he barked, his own hand gripping the handle of his sidearm. "We don't know what kind of backup Donovan has in there, so let's proceed with caution." The deputies nodded, fanning out and taking up positions around the perimeter. Thomas took a deep breath, then strode towards the warehouse's main entrance, his heart pounding in his chest. "Liam Donovan. This is the county sheriff," he shouted, his voice echoing through the empty streets. "I know you're in there, and I've got you surrounded. Come out with your hands up." There was a moment of silence, then the sound of a door creaking open. Donovan stepped out, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. But as Thomas moved closer, he noticed the wily businessman's eyes darting back and forth, searching for an escape route. Well, if it isn't the famous Sheriff Olson," Donovan drawled, a sly grin spreading across his face. "I have to say, I'm impressed. You've done an impressive job of sniffing out my little operation." Thomas narrowed his eyes, his grip tightening on his weapon. "Save the flattery, Donovan. You're going away for a long time. I can promise you that." Donovan chuckled, seemingly unperturbed. "Oh, I don't think so, Sheriff. You see, I've got a few cards up my sleeve." Suddenly, the doors of the warehouse burst open, and a hail of gunfire erupted. Thomas and his deputies dove for cover, exchanging shots with Donovan's heavily armed henchmen. In the chaos, Donovan made a break for it, slipping away amidst the chaos. Thomas cursed under his breath, barking orders to his team to go after him. The pursuit led them through the winding streets, with Donovan weaving in and out of traffic, desperately trying to shake his pursuers. But the sheriff was relentless, his determination fueling his every move. Finally, Donovan's car ran out of road, slamming into a concrete barrier. Thomas pulled up, his weapon drawn, and approached the wrecked vehicle. Donovan emerged, bloodied and battered, his hands raised in surrender. All right, you win, Sheriff," he gasped, his voice laced with defeat. Thomas couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph as he placed the handcuffs on Donovan's wrists. "You should have known better than to mess with the county sheriff, Donovan. Your reign of terror is over." As the disgraced businessman was led away, Thomas turned his attention to the warehouse, where his deputies were still engaged in a fierce firefight with Donovan's henchmen. He knew he had to put an end to this, once and for all. With a deep breath, he charged into the fray, his weapon blazing. In the end, the forces of law and order prevailed, and the criminal syndicate was finally dismantled, its leaders brought to justice. Thomas stood amidst the aftermath, surveying the scene with a mix of relief and satisfaction. It had been a long, hard-fought battle, but in the end, justice had prevailed. As he headed back to the station, the weight of the world seemed to lift from his shoulders. He knew that his community was safer now, thanks to the tireless efforts of his team and his own unwavering determination. The county sheriff had won the day, and the crooks who had dared to prey on his neighbors had learned a valuable lesson. You don't mess with the law in this town.